Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 7th episode of 2023. Before I kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, our platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, and our gold sponsors, Nokia and Vetro. Last week we held our first regional Fiber Connect workshop in Raleigh, North Carolina on Tuesday, February 7th, to a standing room only crowd as we had record attendance. I went back and checked, and our attendance has broken a record by at least 50 people for every regional event since Providence last spring. That's a record attendance in Colorado, and then another record in Columbus, and then a new record again in Raleigh last week. So the key takeaway here is to register early, because unfortunately we had to turn away about 50 or more people that we just couldn't have room for. So register early. Our next regional Fiber Connect workshop is on April 6th. In Oklahoma City. This is going to be a very special event as it's going to put a strong focus on tribal broadband. So you're not going to want to miss that. Yesterday was an interesting day on the Hill with Gigi Sohm's 3rd Senate confirmation hearing as she perseveres in her quest to fill the 5th commissioner seat at the FCC. Gigi was first nominated 15 months ago and failed to be confirmed in the last Congress. President Biden renominated Gigi at the beginning of the year as the Democrats had picked up a seat in the midterm elections, which they had hoped would tip the scales. But despite it being Valentine's Day, love was definitely not in the air. And it's been 2 years since the Biden administration's been in office, and we're still at a 2-2 deadlock across party lines at the FCC. So it's really important that we fill this 5th vacant seat to enable the FCC to be effective. On the NTIA BEAD front, OMB proposed guidance on Build America, Buy America that is raising more questions than answers. As we heard in President Biden's State of the Union address, the administration is looking for fiber for the $42 billion NTIA broadband infrastructure program to be made in the U.S. in an effort to encourage investment in U.S. fiber and cabling plants and more U.S. jobs. As with most things, the devil's in the details. So if you're interested in learning more about these key topics related to the NTIA BEAD program, my guest this afternoon on Where's the Funding is Evan Feynman, the director of the NTIA BEAD program. So Where the Funding, a BEAD Deep Dive will air today at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll be live on broadband.io. And you can register at fiberbroadband.org/webinars. That brings us to today's session with Josh Snowhorn, the CEO of Quantum Loophole, to discuss fiber to the hyperscale data centers, lessons learned. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from the team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us this morning. Before I go over a few logistical items, we'd like to once again thank the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco, and our gold sponsors, Nokia and Vetro. Now, if you'd all keep in mind that everyone is in listen-only mode today, to ask a question, you can just type it into the question box located within the control panel on the right side of your screen. We'll host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is being recorded and will be available to members only on FBA's website within 24 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a very brief feedback survey. If you take a minute to do so, we would really appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, we heard from Mark Boxer from OFS and our FBA board member and chair of our education committee, and Debbie Kish, our Vice President of Workforce Development, on scaling broadband workforce development for BEAD and beyond. Workforce development is an eligible expense for the NTIA BEAD funding and critical to getting all this fiber deployed. For today's Fiber for Breakfast session, we'll be speaking with Josh Snowhorn, the CEO of Quantum Loophole, to discuss fiber to hyperscale data centers, lessons learned. This is going to be an extremely interesting session given the massive fiber loop that's been deployed to extend the Northern Virginia internet ecosystem. Josh Snowhorn, the founder and CEO of Quantum Loop, he values approachability, accessibility, collaboration, innovation, and growth. These qualities guided Josh's leadership in the interconnection industry for over the last 20 years and in building over $10 billion of value along the way. He has pretty much seen and done it all through key foundings and executive positions at Terremark, Verizon, Cincinnati Bell, and CyrusOne. Josh founded the Global Peering Forum, the annual meeting for the Internet interconnection and peering community, where he serves as, on the board of directors. Josh serves on the advisory board of Telescent, the finest automated interconnection machine on the planet. He's an avid speaker at conferences globally, including networking, data centers, real estate, edge networking, and quantum computing. With all that, welcome, Josh. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll work them into the Q&A. So let's get things started, and I'll turn things over to Josh.
Hi, Gary. Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me go ahead and make sure everybody can see my screen. Gary, can you see that fine?
Perfect.
Great. So thank you for having me, and I'm grateful to be able to present Quantum Loophole and what we're doing for the industry. Quantum Loophole is quite unique in that we're building a data center campus to support hyperscale infrastructure, but we actually don't build data centers. We are purely land, energy, water, and most importantly on this call, fiber optics. What we recognize is that the hub of infrastructure in the Northern Virginia marketplace is completely constrained. There's very little land left in this core, and a lot of it's starting to stretch out to the south down to Manassas. You can see where QTS and Compass are building their big campus if that gets approved, and other areas down here, but we're also seeing a lot of power constraints. And we recognize that if we could find a campus that would be able to support mass scale infrastructure, we could create something along the lines of a master plan community. One of the big keys to that was being able to interconnect it with the biggest fiber ring ever constructed. This is just the very bottom tip of our ring, which interconnects Maryland down to the Ashburn edge, or the Ashburn mesh as we like to call it. Each of these squares that I'm highlighting actually represents 3 vaults, and the reason for that is the scale of what we're doing is so big. We're actually putting in a ring that carries 34 2-inch ducts, and inside of that, the entire system is able to accommodate 69 12 fiber trunks. And I can hold that up if you can see my image. I'm not sure if my camera's showing up, but the scale of that is quite unrivaled. We can actually do 235,000 strands of fiber in the system. The first thing we had to do, and one of the most important pieces, was crossing the Potomac River. And if anybody in this industry has done river crossings, they know exactly how exceedingly difficult it is. That begins with a 12-inch pilot hole to go down through the boring. Our boring in this case is 3,900 feet long and goes 91 feet below the bedrock of the Potomac River. That was really the standards we had to achieve to meet approval from the Army Corps of Engineers to cross the Potomac. They were quite sensitive. We do a 24-inch back reaming and then a 36-inch back reaming to make the hole large enough. And what we pull in through that sleeve is an HDPE conduit that's actually 26 inches in diameter. And this is actually our laydown yard in Maryland that goes on for quite an extended distance. This first sleeve and the first set of 34 ducts has already been pulled through and has been completed. Our second crossing across the Potomac goes up into the northern area in between Leesburg and Point of Rocks, and that one should be completed by the end of this month. It's actually a 24-hour day operation right now. The entire system is 43 miles in length, so about 21.5 miles on each side, and allows us the lowest latency possible to be able to reach the marketplace down to the south where other carriers can interconnect to us. It's very important to understand that we're a wholesaler to the wholesalers. So when we provide services, we're just simply trying to support carrier infrastructure and not compete with anybody, but support mass scale, hyperscale needs and requirements. And what that means is being able to support a campus that is the biggest in the world for data centers. It's 2,164 acres. This site was a former Alcoa aluminum smelter. If I turn on time lapse and sort of slide back in time, this is what it used to look like. Alcoa used to own the smelter. They had a huge amount of electricity feeding the site from the Dow substation to the south, which is on First Energy's transmission system. We're actually not fed by Dominion in any way. And over the years, Alcoa decided they were going to tear down the smelter and retire it. And the site basically looks like this today. It's a greenfield site now. And what we did is we then parcelized the site and sell this to companies who want to build data centers and infrastructure. Aligned has purchased this parcel here, and other parcels on the campus, including all of these, are already under contract. We can do anywhere between 14 and 28 million square feet of data center space on the campus, depending on density, if you go 1 or 2 stories. And that's because we have 1,500 acres of light or general industrial land that's entitled for the property. We have over 2,000 megawatts of detailed load study power coming from First Energy to support the campus. And that allows us to, of course, build big data centers, empower all of those servers, switches, routers, and everything else, and then interconnect those into the internet ecosystem. On the campus, we're actually building 2 large network centers. This is Network Center 1 and Network Center 2. These network centers are designed to basically be multi-acre meet-me rooms to enable interconnection between all the parties on the campus or externally. On the campus itself are massive duct bank systems to be able to interconnect every single parcel back to those network centers. In some cases, for example, between Network Center 1 and Network Center 2, there are up to 70 conduits interconnecting those 2 sites together, and allowing really for millions of strand counts of fiber to be able to interconnect and tie everybody together. The way the system looks, it is actually from an outside plant perspective, it's a massively banded together system. This represents 30 of the ducts, and we've buried this 5 feet down, and that's to meet the most stringent government standards for GovCloud work. So any agency work or any DoD work or anything else that anybody needs to do, it's actually supported by the standards of the burial depth that we put in place. We're also putting in Telescent cross-connect machines. These are really outstanding for automation. A Telescent machine allows you to take 1,006 fibers in the back and 1,006 fibers coming out of the front with a robot arm that goes up and down and side to side that latches and interconnects those fibers. It's essentially replacing a network center or a NOC or meet-me room technician who is going out to run and do a patch and interconnect somebody. And the time is really the big factor there, and the reliability. Normal cross connect might take 24 hours to many days to interconnect. This machine, when a customer orders it, and we actually don't touch it at this point, the customer does all the ordering, can do a cross connect in 2 minutes. The advantage here is if you had 1,000 cross connects, it's roughly 2,000 minutes to be able to enable all those as the machine is working and all those jobs are batched. So much more rapidly than any human being can do it. But the biggest advantage as well beyond that is the ability to interconnect across multiple data centers. If you had 20 data centers with 20 different Telescent machines inside of them, you could interconnect those together all at the same time and do a cross connect across all 20 buildings simultaneously in 2 minutes. Has a built-in OTDR to test and everything else required. Imagine the amount of truck rolls saved and the time saved to put in interconnection. No live electronics, it's simply a patch, but it gives us a distinct advantage. Carriers that are actually on the campus already are Verizon, Zayo, AT&T, Sprint, Lumen, Comcast, Segra, UFT, and Atlantic Online. And these are some of the folks down below, DF&I, Summit, FiberLight, and Crown, who are intending to come up. Just understanding kind of the scale of the amount of conduits coming. This is a picture of my butt, if anybody cares, but this is these are the sleeves and the scale that actually went under the river to understand how large it is and what we're putting together. And this is the amount of fibers sitting inside a 6912 trunk. So each of these units are 144 fibers. You can imagine the amount of splicing that's going to take place as we put this in. The spools alone weigh somewhere in the range of 13,000 pounds for every single 6912 fiber trunk spool that we're actually pulling in. So incredibly heavy and dense. This is really the next generation of hyperscale one-to-one optics and interconnection. So we're very proud of this and what we're putting together and creating the biggest data center campus in the world. Gary?
Yeah, well, Josh, first of all, this is absolutely amazing and impressive. So let's just start with, I'm trying to picture splicing 6,912 fiber trunks. So how long does it, how do you splice that? So you're using ribbons? And what, can you talk a little bit, break it down a little bit?
It is ribbon. If I can hold this up as close as I can get to the camera, you can see internally, this is a 6912, this is Corning rocket ribbon. And you can see more than anything, the bend radius, this thing doesn't move. So right. This huge cable, it's very difficult to build this in our ring is a medium haul 43-mile ring. So accommodating the bend radius is one of the biggest thing we had to deal with. The splicing is going to be absolutely insane. If you imagine 34 ducts filled with this and 235,000 strands of fiber, every single splice point is going to be weeks of work to get those enabled and in place. What'll be, it really behooves folks to then put in the longest cables they can to minimize your amount of splice points and of course minimize your loss. So it'll be quite interesting to see what everybody comes up with and how they put that in. The vaulting is also going to be interesting. So each of these vaults, as I said, each of these squares represents 3 vaults. So you can look how we've really densed it up down along the edge of the Ashburn mesh. So each of these vaults being 3 vaults and laying out a number of conduits, it's going to be quite full as we start to do all that splicing. So it'll be, you know, there's gonna be some very busy splicers, and we're gonna support the entire industry for a number of years, I bet.
So can you talk about, so you have these vaults and then you have these different colored conduits. Can you kind of get into how do you manage all this fiber and know where things go?
Sure, we have in our system, we have orange, blue, and black, and those just represent going into a singular vault. If somebody did want to contract for, say, 10 or something along those lines, or 12 conduits that might go into a specific vault, they could take the entire thing and have their own isolated, secured private vault. Otherwise, it's going to be a shared vault. The O&M is going to be done completely by Quantum Loophole contractors. We can't allow anybody else into the vaults just because of the variety of, first of all, the number of fibers going in, and anything that has to do with GovCloud requires incredible security. So we'll be doing all that work for years and years to come.
Yeah, so we have a lot of questions coming in about the labor costs for splicing. It must be fairly significant. I mean, how does that compare with the material costs?
Labor costs are going to be significant. I think that's more of the initial installation more than anything. We're from a material cost perspective, the only fiber that we're putting in is a single trunk of fiber. So we're not in the business really of being a carrier. We're just kind of planting a seed and supporting somebody who might want fiber right away. So that's why we put that in place. And we've acquired Corning rocket ribbon to meet GovCloud standards. It's the only thing certified for any kind of work like that.
So in splicing, you would just basically splice every ribbon and go ribbon by ribbon by ribbon to get to your
every ribbon, and we'll splice the thing. Yeah, we'll close out the entire ring and terminate into the network centers. We are not putting any fibers in on campus onto our campus network. Which really encompasses miles. To understand the campus, it's 3.5 square miles in size, bigger than the city of London. So when we're laying out our conduit on campus itself, it's like building an entire city's infrastructure in a metro network.
So can you talk a little bit about latency? You said super low latency, but you're 43 miles in length. So what kind of latency are you? Do you have an SLA on that, or what? How do you report on latency?
Well, we're not a carrier, so we wouldn't really have an SLA. It's kind of simple to calculate from a mileage perspective. So we have a 43-mile ring. Round trip time is under a millisecond of latency, and that's when we calculate that, that's actually calculating it all the way to Equinix at Filigree Court. But you can notice that we actually don't reach Equinix, so the round trip time is even shorter, just at the edge of our network. And then in that case, you'd pick up other providers like Summit and FiberLight and Zayo and anybody else who might have dark fiber in the region and carry back to the Equinix core. You know, this is certainly the largest interconnection point of the internet, but I have no intention of trying to go crazy and build fiber into this. This is mayhem in here.
Can you talk a little about, I mean, the cross connect, this Telescent cross connect? I mean, that sounds absolutely beyond this world. I mean, so can you explain a little bit about, I mean, if you're looking at 235,000 strands of fiber and you're connecting across multiple buildings and multiple, I mean, so how does that all work?
Sure, the Telescent machine, each machine takes 1,006 fibers into the back. Let me go up to the imagery of it. And what you're seeing here is an entire container loaded up with machines, just to give you an idea of scale. Each one of these, where my cursor is going, is a single Telescent machine. So once it's patched into the back of that, and then the alternative interconnecting party is patched to the front, then you've got an outside plant to inside plant or campus-wide kind of interconnection. Where it starts to get expensive and complex is if you start cascading and interconnecting an any-to-any interconnection between machines across the entire campus. We will have hundreds of these machines in place, by far and away exceeding the actual one-to-one 235,000 strand count, fully loaded up system to be able to interconnect folks. I do anticipate that some people will go the path of traditional patches just because they have engineering religion and that's how they like to do it. But from the perspective of automation and rapidity, this is what we would prefer to do and put in place.
Wow, it's really impressive. So can we talk about power for a second? We got a lot of questions here about, how much power these data centers are consuming. And, so you mentioned 2,000 megawatts. I have to think that power is kind of top of mind for everybody, especially as these data centers continue to grow.
Yeah, we have over 2,000 megawatts. We think that we'll be closer to 2.4 gigawatts or 2,400 megawatts of power, and we have a detailed load study proving that out from First Energy, and that'll come along in tranches. What we're putting in place in our very first substation is 1,000 MVA substations, roughly 1,080 megawatts, to be able to deliver to customers. The first customer going in place who's already closed on their land is Aligned. This is a publicly disclosed footprint that they've provided in press releases for the data centers that they're putting on the campus. And inside of that, they originally said 192 megawatts. I believe it's almost 300 megawatts that they intend to put just on that one parcel. So the world of power is an incredibly limiting factor for folks right now in the industry. The data centers are getting denser and denser and denser. We're bumping up against the laws of fluid dynamics for the ability to move air around, and that's going to start to invite things like liquid cooling and power densities that could go as high as 10x what you might see today. So imagine if that's the case, this could be a 3,000 megawatt parcel. So it's quite wild to think of the future of power and where things are going to be moving along. You also have goals of reaching ESG targets, green power. We're on transmission systems. First Energy is 24,000 miles of primarily just transmission and distribution by Potomac Edison. That allows companies to acquire power purchase agreements for solar and wind and nuclear and hydro and anything else that can acquire that meets their ESG targets, so we can actually have green data centers. Where you start to see issues, Gary, is down to the south. Dominion announced, and to really a lot of people's surprise, that they have no more power until 2026. Everything in the pink area is actually the area that's constrained. They've been able to carve out 50, 60 megawatt tranches for folks here and there, but it's been quite limited. That first new transmission line coming in 2026 is probably going to be going to Digital Realty's campus, the Airport Western Lands campus down here. It's about a 424 acre campus. But that single line coming in is, let's call it an average of 1,250 megawatts. You can do anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 megawatts on a 500 kV line, depending on how far the power produced has to travel. The next power line doesn't come in until 2029. There is enough demand request already in place in Loudoun County with existing land and data centers being built to gobble up all of that capacity already. And that's where you're starting to see the change of data centers pushing farther south to Prince William County and up to Frederick County in Maryland, where we are. So power is quite a limiting factor.
So with all this power, cooling is king. And you said you guys do water management, so I assume that's gray water management on cooling, or how's that working?
We're very unique in that we have 7 million gallons of gray water and gray water that's actually forecasted to grow. That's treated sewage water coming from the city of Frederick. That transits directly by our campus and goes into the Potomac. The actual outfall for that is located right here. So we're able to capture that gray water and utilize that for cooling services to be able to provide chilled water with reused water. So we have that sustainability factor of brownfield land being reclamated, existing transmission lines being reclamated, and all of the gray water come by our campus being reclamated. Where you're going to start to see changes on cooling beyond chilled water and airflow systems are dielectric centralized cooling systems. And we'll be able to build a centralized cooling plant using our QWater platform in this area of the campus and distribute that with underground piping we have throughout the campus provide dielectric liquid cooling services, really the future of where data center cooling is going.
So you guys have quantum in your name. I see quantum on all your charts. Is there any quantum networking going on in this area, or do you see that as a future? Or?
Well, there's quantum networking and quantum computing are two completely different things. So we do have a lot of folks discussing quantum computing with us. Just a tickle with our name has absolutely nothing to do with data centers or anything else. It's just quantum loophole is just a scientific phrase about the loopholes and proving that quantum entanglement actually exists. That loophole's been closed, but that's our name. We do have several quantum computing platforms in discussions with us coming to the campus, and I think there'll be a lot more. Quantum networking is going to be interesting. You wouldn't even need fiber anymore if that actually becomes true. We'll be able to entangle qubits and photons, across the universe instantly. So we'll see if that ever takes hold.
I don't know. All the quantum physicists I talk to say we're going to be relying on fiber for a long time, but as long as they start working on their quantum repeaters, so that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But can you talk a little bit about, but first of all, the resiliency is amazing. So you're talking about having 30 ducts buried 5 feet deep, and so that is, so weather, nuclear attacks, whatever. I mean, so what kind of resilient? I mean, these data centers are going to be critical to their nation, right? So that's why
Absolutely.
You're so deep.
The fiber system itself, by being 5 feet deep, it is designed to withstand any EMP incident, so specifically exceeding the DoD standards to support that. From a resiliency perspective, because it's not only buried deep, but it's a complete ring, obviously extremely expensive to build. We have 34 ducts in place, and that ring architecture allows it to be completely protected. So if you did have the errant backhoe who decided to take out 34 ducts that are fully loaded and all the splicers come running to fix it, you have a completely resilient path. But in addition, outside of just the QLoop path itself, we have 8 separate carriers that are coming into the campus, including the original AT&T long lines that was the original Ma Bell nuclear survival system. That system that went straight through our campus, 16-foot wide easement with seismically isolated racks to carry the original coax inside of it. It was quite interesting. That's of course now fiber, but we have a lot of outside plant carriers coming to the facility and diverse paths going down 270 out Point of Rocks Bridge, and then long haul going to New York and Chicago via these splice points up here. So it's a heavily connected site that offers some diversity from a northern perspective from the Ashburn ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds pretty complex and amazing. So with all this complexity, how are your fiber circuits into and within the QLoop provisioned and monitored? You have a system to track and visualize all this?
Sure, that's really via the Telescent system and our CRM system. We're just getting ready to execute a deal with Karma, which a lot of data centers use to handle their cross connects and power and provisioning. And they have an API already tied into the Telescent system. So most of this will be portal based because of the automation. A client will log in, they'll be able to see a map of their cross connects. If they have an outage, they can isolate that fiber with the machine by enabling a test. The machine will put it into an OTTR, run the test, and find out where the fault is. If it's not there, then they can start to narrow it down. So our business is really, our goal is really not to do, or very little coming out of vertically out of the ground. The network centers are about it. All of the rest of our infrastructure is horizontal and buried. That includes sewage, potable and non-potable water, underground power infrastructure. The biggest thing obviously coming out of the ground is the substations, which are gigantic. We'll also have, from an energy perspective, not to digress from interconnection, but a large 100-hour battery farm and hydrogen electrolyzers to be able to produce hydrogen fuel as backup instead of diesel, things like that for sustainability. But the automation side is key here. We're not a big company when it comes to personnel. We're using the best-in-class contractors and the best-in-class technologies going forward.
Well, Josh, I mean, this is absolutely amazing, and the scale of what you're doing is phenomenal. So thanks for sharing your insights and expertise and how to connect these hyperscale data centers with fiber. I love this, the size of those fibers are amazing. But anyway, thanks for joining us. And thanks everybody for joining us, and look forward to getting back together next week. We're going to be discussing the Bay into Bay High with Brad Moline, the president and CEO of Allo Communications, as he discusses how fiber is changing the lives of the youth in Lincoln, Nebraska. So thanks for joining. Thanks, Josh, and we'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Thank you, Gary.